Is Rick Moore, and I'm going to be your interviewer today. Welcome to Write, and we're going to interview the author of the EVERSTEAM Chronicles, Jude Matulich-Hall. How are you doing, Jude?
I'm doing great. How are you, Rick?
I'm doing just fine, thanks. Let's get right to the interview, right?
Yeah.
At what point do you think someone should call themselves a writer, and what difference do you see between a writer and an author?
So, for me personally, I didn't start calling myself a writer until I had finished a complete novel
Right?
and it got picked up by you, my publisher. So I think like it wasn't for me, but I was just tentative about calling myself a writer until I knew that I was going to take it seriously enough to finish something. And so as with like writers and authors, so writers I think encompasses everyone from poets to songwriters to journalists. All of those people are writers. And I think like book wise, I think once someone has written a book, then authors write stories and books. So, a journalist wouldn't call themselves an author, but an
That's
essayist might be an author of some, so it's kind of
iffy.
a vague vague word. But again, I didn't call myself an author until my book actually came out and was actually solid. So now I call myself an author, but I didn't before.
Good.
So I think it depends on the person.
It's a good feeling, isn't it?
But yeah, writers are more encompassing the whole slew of us.
Yep.
And author is specifically storytellers.
Now, have you ever considered writing under a pseudonym, or why not?
I have, but my pseudonym would probably be pretty close to my real name. I've thought about like maybe possibly one day writing mystery stories that are completely different than my fantasy stories. And so I might go under a different name like Judith Hall for that one or something. But I mean, I understand why some people do. I know one gal, she writes children's books, but she also writes adult books. And so she does have two different names for that because she doesn't want a kid picking up one of her adult books, and so she does keep it separately like that. So I understand why people use a pseudonym.
That makes sense.
There's also the part of me that's like, well, I want people to know it was me.
Who you are. Now, how do you deal and process negative book reviews? Because everybody's going to have some negative book reviews.
Sure, everyone is going to. It's inevitable. You're not going to please everyone. And with social media and the computers and stuff, it's a lot easier to be mean to people.
Yep.
If you were face to face. So it's going to happen. I haven't had a bad book review yet, but I have had bad critique, negative critiques or someone calling me on something of like, I just recently had someone say that I needed to do my research. And it was really funny because they were jumping on me about something that I had done my research on. And the route I took was scientifically sound, but they weren't seeing the whole thing because they hadn't read the whole thing. Right. And so, but it's kind of like, I have to be honest, it kind of hurts a little bit, but ultimately it's not personal.
Yeah, I imagine it would hurt, but it's really not personal. And so many of the critiquers they're just writing to have something to say.
Yeah, I think so.
They want to be heard, they want to get your attention. Everybody
has an opinion and it's not necessarily true, right? I mean, it's not true for me. I love my book and books, and I'm writing for the people that love my books, and the people that hate them, it's like, okay, you have to let it just go.
Yep.
You can't let it drag you down.
I imagine so. Now, are there therapeutic benefits to modeling a character after someone you know?
I haven't really modeled any of my recent characters over people I personally know. I've based them on, been influenced by other characters
right.
in movies and shows and history. But I modeled one character after a pet that I had
Oh, really?
that died.
That's interesting.
So it was my way of honoring that pet, and because I have animals in my books. So
Yep.
one of my animals was based on a rabbit I had that died, and it was really heartbreaking. And so it did, you know, it was a very personal section of the book for me, and I wrote my own thoughts down when I was dealing with the process of her death and everything. So I think it was therapeutic in that sense. As for people so far, I haven't really ventured that way yet, but I imagine that it can be very therapeutic or very angering. You know, I know people that kill people they hate in their stories, you know, so.
Oh my God, that's cool.
Yeah.
Now, what is the most difficult part of your writing process?
You know, honestly, the most difficult, I'm working on it now, and my husband's helping me. The most difficult part of my writing process isn't the actual writing process. It's being on a computer, working on the same computer that I check my email and my social media on.
Really?
So what tends to happen with me is I tend to get distracted with, oh, I'm just gonna check. How's my book doing on it? You know, like I'm in between sentences or I'm figuring something out, and so it's habitually becoming.
It's a trap, isn't it?
It is a trap. So I'm actually, my husband built me a little table I have a yoga room upstairs where I meditate, and I'm going to when I'm working on my own work, I'm going to start going up there with because my keyboard is, my keyboard is Bluetooth keyboard, so I can use a tablet with my keyboard. And so I'll go upstairs with my keyboard and tablet, and all I can do on that tablet is write because it's so slow.
Won't you miss checking on your social media posts though, and checking how your book's doing on Amazon?
You know, I probably will miss it, but I still have this computer, and I'll still be working on this computer. So it's just separate. For me, I definitely need that separation.
I think everybody does.
It's discipline, self-discipline.
If you can't have two computers, you're toast, right?
Yeah.
How long have you been writing, or when did you start?
So the first round, I probably started when I was 10, 11, or 12.
Oh my gosh.
And I wrote through college, but then I stopped. So the second round so far, I started again 6 years ago. So I've been writing for real for 6 years.
Really? Good.
Yeah.
Good. Now,
it's a lot of fun.
Yeah. What advice would you give to a writer working on their first book? Because that's kind of critical for them, right?
Yeah. You know, coming from my own stumbling blocks, I edited as I went along. And so the process took a long time because I was kind of fixated on getting everything just perfect the first time.
Right.
And so my first advice would be, do not edit as you go along, or edit as little as possible as you go along. Right. But then when you're done, edit, and edit again, and get someone else to edit. I think that's the biggest problem I see with new writers that come to me, is that they don't have an editor. They're not doing it themselves.
Right.
But also you get to a point where you know your story so well that you fill in the blanks and you're filling in and you know the story. So you're not really seeing the editing mistakes anymore. So you really need someone outside of yourself.
Yeah. Would you advise a writer, when they're finished with their first manuscript, their very first book, to put it in a drawer for 3 months or 6 months and then come back and edit it, or just plow it ahead?
I think editing as soon as you're finished with it, then putting it away. And then pulling it out and editing again. Personally, I don't think I could ignore a manuscript for a whole 6 months. But, you know, definitely a month, 2 months, 3 months if you have that ability.
You've got to look at it with fresh eyes.
You have to look at it with fresh eyes. And you have to have eyes that know nothing about your story to look at it as well. I always have 3 or 4 people that look at it. And they're not professional editors or anything, but I kind of have a conglomerate of people. My husband is my first reader, and he's not an editor, but he's good with stories, and so he can tell me if the flow is good and things like that. And then I have people that just have different aspects that they focus on, and so just a small group of beta readers, and then I have a publisher, so I'm lucky. I get my next book I will not edit as much as I did my first book, because knowing that I have that backup. I won't do it 6 times. I'll just do it maybe 3. I don't know. Maybe just
now, let's get down to yourself. What comes first for you? What are the elements of good writing?
Oh, the elements of good writing. Oh gosh. I think well, I kind of mentioned it before, like a writer really should research. If they're doing something based on historical stuff, or creating things that are familiar to what the reader will be reading, I think it's important to look it up. So for instance, even though my next novel takes place in an alternate world, it's still pirates. So I still do research on boats, and how do they tie knots, what knots are they using, just simple stuff like that. So I think it's important to study. I guess it's not really research, it's study what's already been researched, and read. It's very important to read. Very important. Yeah, writers that don't read, I'm not so sure about. So far I haven't come across a writer that says they don't read, and I've actually been able to enjoy their book. I mean, nothing personal, but that's just me. I think it's important to read. And it works. I think it probably works the same parts of the brain. And so I know for myself, it really gets the creative juices flowing when I read. And I had a third thing. I can't think of what it was now. Studying, reading.
It'll come to you.
It will.
Now, what comes first for you, the plot or the characters?
The plot.
Why the plot?
Yeah, the plot, definitely. Always the plot comes first, and then I create the characters around that. I almost meditate on it and just let my mind kind of relax with the idea, and then it starts forming characters.
So most writers I talk to say that the characters come first. Oh. You're unusual that the plot comes first, because that's very good.
Oh, great. Yeah.
You're concentrating on the plot. Yeah. But how do you develop your plot and your characters?
How do I develop them? Oh gosh, that's a big question.
With lots of work, right? Yes, it is.
Lots of what?
Lots of work.
Oh yeah, it is lots of work. And how do I do it? Well, actually, with my novel I'm working on now, I actually created a very loose outline. So, it's an epic fantasy. It's a long book. There's a lot of characters. There's a lot of scenes. So I started writing down what I wanted to happen, and, I was able to look at it and move around things to make sure it's in a good order. And, I wasn't in one scene too long, didn't drag out one scene too long that it would get boring, breaking up things, but not too much, because you don't want to give the reader whiplash, which I did with my first book when before I edited it. It was really choppy, and I was jumping from scene to scene. But Yeah, I think at least a loose outline is a good idea to know where your story's going. It can always change, but I do tend to stick to, if I know how the book is going to end, it's going to end like that no matter what. Or a story,
Right.
it's going to end like that no matter what. I always try to figure, I like knowing the ending when
Right.
I start.
I do too.
I mean, if the trail goes crazy in between, start and stop, that's fine. I'll just let it go. But eventually I know it has to get to that
Right.
end.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, how do you develop your characters?
I use the five senses. And I just really try to imagine being that character so that I
Really?
kind of get in
You
their
role play
mind.
it out in your mind? You
Huh?
role play it out in your mind? You role play it?
Kinda, yeah. Like I just kind of put myself in that person's situation and try to think like them um and use their voice when they're
That's
in
very
my
interesting.
head when I'm writing.
Yes, that is interesting. Now, how would you say you use social media as an author? Last question, because
Yeah.
for the
Oh,
interview,
okay.
because we're going to have a
Uh,
total of 5 interviews, by the way.
oh, okay.
Yes.
Cool.
But
All
how
right.
how would you use social media as an author? How do you use
How
social
do
media as
I
an
use
author?
it? I have a podcast on YouTube, and
Right.
so I share my podcast with people that follow me and people however social media works. I
Right.
just I post it.
Right.
And I support other writers. I boost other
Oh, that's a
writers.
great idea.
Yeah, and that's what my podcast is I actually talk to other writers, and
Right.
I'm hoping to boost them. Um, I promote my book, but that's not all I do. I think it's important to interact, but not take up all your time with it. You can really get caught
I
up
don't
in, especially
consume
if you're
that.
doing more than one platform. It can
Yeah.
get really time consuming. So I do try to get a little bit of interaction in there, definitely boosting other writers. It's the first thing I do. And I promote my book probably only once a week do I push my book on
Good.
social
Good.
media. Yeah, I've come across a few writers that it was like a daily thing. And if it bothers me, I know it bothers
Oh
other
yeah.
people.
Would
And
be
I
better.
don't want to be a spammer.
Yeah, I think
But
that's
it's not
onerous.
just about me.
Right.
It's about supporting other people too.
So you
And
attract followers by supporting other authors, right?
yeah, I think so.
That's really good. That's really good.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that concludes today's interview for Wright. And tune in next week. We'll have our next episode, our next interview with Jude Matulich-Hall.
All right.
And
Thank you.
thank you a lot. All right.
Yeah.
Bye bye.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.